The Tom Woods Show, episode 800.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, if you missed the Contra Cruise, a week of hilarity and tremendous fun at sea with Bob Murphy and me, well, check out the highlight video and just maybe a link to future cruises. Check it out at contracruise.com. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. Amazing, isn't it? Episode 800. How thrilling. Thanks so much for listening, for spreading the word about the show and sharing the episodes on social media or letting your friends know about it. I've gotten a lot of emails from people saying, I started listening to your show because my friend told me I'd like it, and sure enough, I'm binging on the episodes now, so that's great. Well, today we're joined once again by Jordan Peterson, who was on the program not long ago to talk about his travails at the University of Toronto with the politically correct crowd because he won't go along with the gender pronoun issue, with the idea that there are multiple genders in the dozens and dozens or hundreds perhaps, and there are different pronouns that ought to be used for people to correspond to these. He just said, I'm not doing any of this, and you can imagine what happened. So we talked to him about that. But I thought it's a shame. Here's a guy who does really good scholarly work. He's a clinical psychologist and a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. Before that, he was a professor at Harvard University. So I thought, why should we let the terrorists win? The terrorists have won if Professor Peterson isn't allowed to actually spend his time talking about what he really wants to talk about, which is psychology and which is improving people's lives. And he has a very, very interesting and, as it turns out, extremely effective program called self-authoring, which he's going to tell us about today, that has had great results in terms of specific outcomes in looking at metrics involving the quality of life and people's success in school and all these other areas. And this self-authoring program has just had such incredible results. I thought, all right, well, let's get Jordan Peterson back on to talk about what he actually does when he's allowed to do his work and he's not hounded by the politically correct people. So we're going to have some links at tomwoods.com/800. Obviously, we're going to link to the self-authoring program. We'll link to a bunch of other stuff about Professor Peterson, so you'll definitely want to check that out. Professor Peterson, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. I'm looking forward to it.
We had a great conversation last time you were here, and everybody really enjoyed it on our end. And I want to talk about a completely different topic with you today, but it would be silly not to acknowledge that things have transpired since we last spoke. And when we last spoke, you mentioned that there was going to be a debate on your campus surrounding some of the issues that have been at the root of the controversy, and that debate has taken place. Was there an official resolution? What was the exact nature of the debate, and how did it come out?
Well, I was facing two interlocutors, I suppose, who were challenging my interpretation of the Canadian legislation that I was objecting to. And I would say they relied mostly on ad hominem attacks and also on attempts to minimize the seriousness of the legislation. Since I've made an issue of this, there's been a number of lawyers on the left side of the spectrum, on the radical left side of the spectrum, who claim that I'm exaggerating the dangers of the legislation and that it's nowhere near as punitive as it actually is. About 150,000 people or more now might be up to 200,000 by now, have watched the debate online. And I would say that the consensus running about 20-1 is that my opponents discredited themselves during the debate. And to some degree, I suppose so did the university, because the university insisted upon pulling three politically correct stunts during the debate. The first was thanking the native communities upon whose land the university was originally, or the university is now founded, which strikes me as hypocritical to say the least, as well as politically correct. Then announcing that there were counselors standing by in case any of the live audience members of the debate were too upset by the proceedings. And at the end, by announcing a Trans Remembrance Day celebration, even though, that the event wasn't supposed to be, let's say, hijacked for commercial or otherwise private pursuits. And so anyways, if people are interested, they can watch the debate at Jordan Peterson Videos. It's all live there. But, at least the university held the debate, which was the right thing to do as far as I'm concerned. And I think it did help get these concerns aired more thoroughly. And they need to be aired very thoroughly because they're very damp and mildewy. So, and since then, the attention to this issue has proceeded apace. It's been crazy. I think my son and I tried to count up the newspaper coverage so far, and in Canada and increasingly around the world now, there's been 180 newspaper articles and 4 million views on related issues, something like that, at least that on YouTube. And it's really been an onslaught, a crazy onslaught.
I know you're not the pat yourself on the back type, but you should pat yourself on the back because we wouldn't have been having this discussion in the first place if it hadn't been for one professor who spoke up and said, I'm not going to go along.
Yeah, well, it certainly produced a tremendous response, and I am very pleased about that. I mean, I'm getting hundreds of letters and of people who've been silenced in one way or another, from people who've been silenced one way or another by the politically correct authoritarians, and it certainly provoked a tremendous discussion online and increasingly in the United States. I was on Joe Rogan's podcast on Monday.
I heard it was excellent.
Well, the people seem to be pleased with it, and lots of people are watching it, and so that's all to the good. That's all to the good, as far as I'm concerned. I hope that people are awake and paying attention, because what's going on in our political culture is it's not good. It's not good at all. So, it would be good if people were awake and ready to respond properly. And I guess that leads us into the next topic of our discussion, what might constitute a proper response.
Right, indeed. Well, first of all, let me tell people, this being episode 800, I'm going to link to that video, the debate, directly on the show notes page, tomwoods.com/800. Yeah, I want to talk about the main topic of our discussion today, but first, I guess I would ask what comes next for you, because that is the question beyond a lot of people's minds.
Well, it looks like I'll be teaching my undergraduate courses as usual in January. I think the university, although they sent me 2 warning letters, they seem to have decided that they're going to leave me be, which is wise. It isn't self-evident to me that that would have been their decision had there not been so much public attention brought to this issue. But there was, and I am going to be continuing with my undergraduate teaching. Now, what that will mean in terms of student response is difficult to say. I have no idea if there'll be demonstrations or that kind of thing when I start teaching again, but I'm not particularly concerned about that. I can probably handle that. So to some degree, it might be business as usual, but I'll find all that out in January when my undergraduate classes start again.
Did you tell me that you were part of Heterodox Academy? Are you part of that?
I'm not officially part of it, although I had made tentative steps towards joining it a couple of months ago, even before this all started. I have talked recently with Jonathan Haidt. He's done some excellent work with regards to combating political correctness very carefully and also empirically and rationally. So it's definitely something that I'm interested in. I'm also very interested in continuing my educational efforts online on YouTube and with podcasts, because the potential reach and consequence of using those social media platforms is really unparalleled. So that's going to be a very interesting thing to continue to investigate. I'm converting a lot of my YouTube videos to podcasts right now and hope to have them up relatively soon.
Well, I want you to know that I've done 800 episodes of this podcast, and then I have a weekly podcast. I've done another 63. If you need any help, I would be really glad to offer my pro bono services. If you just have a question here and there, a tech problem or whatever, a strategic question, I've been through it all. So drop me a line.
Okay, well, that's very helpful, and I may well do that.
Because, by the way, I'll tell you, when I was starting a podcast, I wish there had been one person I could reach out to who knew, because sometimes they know half the question. They know how to do audio, but they don't know podcasts, or they do this, or they don't know that. At this point, I know it all, so I'd be glad to help.
All right. Well, I'll definitely keep that in mind.
All right, let's talk about self-authoring
Sure.
over at selfauthoring.com. I thought, this poor guy who has done all this great scholarly work, doesn't get to talk about a lot of it these days because you have to talk about all this other controversial stuff. Let's talk about what some of the things you actually do for a living as part of your work. And selfauthoring.com, of course, will also be linked to tomwoods.com/800. Start off by telling us in brief what self-authoring is.
Well, it's a tenet of modern sophisticated psychology that people's identity, which is sort of the toolkit they use to operate in the world, it's a toolkit of perceptions and skills, let's say, has a narrative structure, a story-like structure. And that's part of the reason why we naturally like stories so much, because when we go watch a story or listen to one, we're learning about how someone else sees the world and acts in it, successfully or unsuccessfully, and we can derive the relevant conclusions from that. So, if it's a comedy, we watch the hero make his way successfully to his conclusion, and if it's a tragedy, we watch someone fail in a painful way, and we can derive useful information from both of those story types. Carl Jung was the great psychoanalyst, was very much convinced that people acted out stories in their lives, and that you needed to become aware of what your story was, because maybe it was a tragedy and you were acting out a tragedy, and maybe if you became conscious of that, you'd decide that a happier ending would be something more in keeping with your desires. And a lot of what happens in psychotherapy is a dialectical process or a dialogical process between two people that's designed to help the person who's seeking counseling get their story straight. And really what that means is that it often means an evaluation of the past to understand why things went wrong, not so much to experience an emotional catharsis, as Freud insisted, but to derive wisdom from those negative occurrences so that when you act again in the future, you're much less likely to repeat errors. And so the purpose of memory is to help you organize your story so that you can act in the world so that you can get what you want and need. Now, there's a side story here about I've been doing business consulting for a very long time, helping people hire better employees. I have a company that does that. And one of the questions that I kept being asked by the middle managers that I was talking to over decades was, well, it's good to hire good people, but what do I do with the people that I already have that aren't performing very well? And I never had a really good answer to that because I didn't know of any psychologically valid interventions that could be employed by managers that would help people who were struggling. And so, but after I got asked about the 100th time, I decided to do an investigation to see if I could find anything that worked. And I came across the work of James Pennebaker at the University of Texas at Austin. And Pennebaker had showed that if you get university undergraduates to write 3 days in a row for 15 minutes about the worst thing that ever happened to them, that their physical and mental health improved substantially. And he found, when he went back to look at the narratives to see if he could predict whose health improved the most, it was people who used a lot of words indicating a dawning understanding or new comprehension, or it was people who had developed a causal model of the negative events that had befallen them. And that decreased their general stress level, and it was the decrease in stress level that seemed to produce the health improvement. And so I modified Pennebaker's approach. Other people who'd followed him had showed that people who write about uncertainty of any sort, whether it's past or present or future for that matter, seem to experience the same health effects. And so I combined that with this more psychoanalytic narrative approach, and my business partners and I developed 3 programs: past authoring, present authoring, and future authoring. And the past authoring program helps people write an autobiography. It gets people to break their life into 6 epochs or sections, and then to write about the most important and emotionally relevant events in each section of their life. And then the present authoring program helps people use a standard personality model to evaluate their virtues and their faults, and to help them decide how to capitalize on their virtues and to rectify their faults. And then the future authoring program, it starts out by asking people a pointed question about each of 6 dimensions of their life. And so you can analyze your life dimensionally in terms of its function and quality. Say, How are you doing with regards to educational opportunities, career goals, intimate relationships, family relationships, use of drugs and alcohol, and maintenance of mental and physical health? If you were structuring your life optimally, how would you optimize your existence across those 6 dimensions? So that's the warm-up question. And then you're asked to write for 15 minutes without being too concerned with grammar or spelling or structure about what your life could be like 3 to 5 years in the future if you were taking care of yourself properly, and if you were designing your life as if you were someone that you cared for. And then you're asked to write for 15 minutes to develop a counter vision, which is, what would your life be like 3 to 5 years down the road if you let all your bad habits and resentments and hatreds and procrastination and all of that get out of hand so that it augured you into the ground? To some degree, what we're having people do is specify a heaven to aim at and a hell to avoid. And that maximizes motivation, because if you specify your goals, then you can clearly see when you're moving towards them. And that's where people derive most of their positive emotion, is from evidence that they're moving towards valued goals. And if you're fleeing from something that you really don't want and that you hate, then that can put fear behind you instead of having it in front of you where it stops you. It can be behind you, pushing you. And then people take their positive vision and develop a comprehensive plan that includes a justification for all the sub-steps and a description of why it would be good for them and for their family and for society, and how they would overcome obstacles and how they would keep themselves on track. And we've tested this with about 7,000 university students now, although it's not designed specifically for university students. It's designed for everyone. And most of that work has been done in Holland at the Rotterdam School of Management at Erasmus University. Michaela Schippers has been doing that. And we've raised the grade point average of their first year business students by 20 to 25% and dropped their dropout rate by 20 to 25%. And it's had the biggest impact on male students and on non-Western ethnic minority students, whose performance it has radically improved by about 70%. And so and we also tested it at a small college in Canada last year, as well as another university here, and duplicated the results. It's an extremely effective program for helping people specify their goals, for increasing the probability that they'll move towards them, and for helping them stick to what can often be difficult, to see their way through difficulties and to stick to their plans. And so the program is available online at selfauthoring.com. We had a free offer on the Future Authoring program. I think it ends today, but we've given away about 17,000 of them now over the last few weeks, because a fair bit of attention has been directed towards them. So we're hoping that people can use the programs to improve their effectiveness, productivity, and quality of life as individuals. And you can think about that as an alternative to adopting like a totalitarian mindset or degenerating into kind of nihilism. They're character development programs, and they were designed specifically for that purpose, to make individuals stronger. Because I think that's the best defense against pathological political developments.
Okay, I have several questions I want to ask. First of all, it sounds great. The results sound great. The program sounds great to a layman like me anyway. How labor intensive is it? I ask that because I think there are a lot of people who are maybe like me, that they get excited about a new thing like this and they're all gung-ho to get started. Yeah. And after a day and a half, they stop doing it. It's too much work.
Oh, well, I would say, well, look, I mean, when we implemented that at Mohawk College, we had kids come in for their orientation in the summer, and they did the whole Future Authoring program in 60 minutes. And it dropped their dropout rate by about 50%. So what I would say is, it's as labor intensive as you want it to be. So some people write thousands of words, and additional writing makes it work better. But I would strongly encourage people to do a bad job and not to be afraid of it. First of all, you're writing for yourself. And if you do a sketchy, bad job, like a first pass approximation, that's way better than not doing it at all. And perfectionism is definitely your enemy in a program like this, because you're not going to get it 100% right. What you're trying to do is to move yourself ahead, not to do something perfectly. And so I would say, if you're trying to do it so well that it's stopping you from doing it, then you're trying to do it too well, and you should try to do it worse.
Oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. I guess I'm also interested in the recommended age to start this, because it seems to me if you have a real command over where you've been, where you are, where you're going, that would really situate you very well in life. But yet if you're too young, you haven't really been anywhere yet, you can't really make sense of it. So what would be ideal?
Well, we certainly know that we have two versions. We have an adult version, which is at selfauthoring.com, and we've developed a high school version too for people who are 13 to 17. And that's at a website called ivplan.com, IVIE plan.com. And that was developed by a doctoral student of mine, Christine Brophy. And we're implementing that with about 2,000 high school students. We've tested it on high school students already, but we're implementing it with about 2,000 high school students come January. So if people are interested in the version for younger people, then they could get a hold of me, and I'll put them in touch with Christine Brophy. And we haven't done the follow-up research yet to see if the effects are as powerful for high school students as they are for older people, although there's every reason to expect they will be. So, and we built the version for younger people to address exactly the concerns that you just described, which is younger people, a 13 or a 14-year-old can't really think out 3 to 5 years into the future in terms of their identity, because they change so much and they know comparatively so little about the way the world lays out. That's an unrealistic time span. So we have students with the junior version, or with the version for younger people, think more like 3 to 6 months out ahead.
All right, that's smart. I ask this because as I listen to you describing it, it sounds to me like something I would have benefited from a lot. I mean, I suppose everybody goes through junior high school angst, but these were rough years for me. And I think as I look back to even to my 20s, I didn't know where I was going or what I was about or who I was. I never took the time to do something like this. Well,
Tom, it's so strange because when I first started doing this, which would be about 10 years ago, I implemented it in my classes, and because I have a class called Maps of Meaning, which is based on the book I wrote by the same name, and it's about narrative and identity formulation. And one of the things I realized was that I had all these 21-year-old students in my class, because it's an advanced undergraduate class, and no one had ever sat them down and asked them to write out a justification for their plans for the development of their character and their future, to write that out and to evaluate it with as much rigor as you might evaluate just an ordinary essay. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought about how absurd that was, that we have these students who've come through good schools and then gone to a hypothetically good university, and yet no one's ever required them to craft and formulate a vision for their own development. And it bothered me so much once I realized that I went and did some research into the origin of the school systems, the public school systems in North America, to find out why in the world that hadn't been built into at the beginning. And what I found was that the public school system was developed in Chicago in the late 1800s, and it was developed by fascists. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean, this was prior to World War II, but these were people who were very heavily influenced by the Prussian military model. And the Prussian state was set up to produce obedient soldiers, basically. And the Japanese, of course, modeled their school system on the Prussian system as well. So it wasn't only in North America. And the school system was set up fundamentally to train obedient workers, because people were rushing into the cities because of industrialization. Their children needed somewhere to go while their parents worked, and the children were most likely to grow up to be something like factory workers. So they were trained basically in obedience and time management. And that's still the basic underlying structure of the public school system so many years later. And there was no room in that model for producing people who were autonomous developers of their own destiny, even though that's undoubtedly the most important thing that you could possibly guide someone towards. So anyways, this is our attempt to rectify that problem. We wanted to make a solution that everyone could do, that was widely distributable, that was low cost, and that was highly effective. And all of our research indicates that the program does accomplish those goals. Like I said, we've improved the performance of non-Western ethnic minority males in Holland by 70%. They were radically underperforming, especially the Dutch women at the business school. And after 2 years after completing the future authoring program, they were slightly outperforming the Dutch women, even though the Dutch women had also improved. And this is also tremendously interesting because people think that the failure of immigrant communities, new immigrant community members to assimilate, say, or their difficulty in assimilation is a sociological and a sociocultural problem. But we have a psychological intervention that was targeted directly to the individual, and it seems to have eradicated the negative effect of the cultural difference.
Those numbers, some of the numbers you're giving are really astonishing. From the beginning, the numbers you've been giving. How do you account for this? Answer, they went through the program. But what specifically about it could explain numbers like that?
Well, I think there's two reasons. So I know a fair bit. I've studied for a very long time to try to understand the positive side of human motivation. Like people can do things because they're afraid and they want to escape from fear. They can do things because they want to avoid pain and depression and all the negative emotions. But people also do things because of positive emotion. And there's a positive emotion system that runs on a chemical called dopamine. And the dopamine system is the system that drugs like cocaine affect positively. And so you take cocaine because it produces an activity in the dopaminergic system, and you experience that as motivating. But the dopamine system, what it essentially does is indicate to you when your actions are producing consequences that are putting you on a pathway towards a desired goal. And so, for example, if you're hungry and you walk into the kitchen and you can smell turkey baking, that's going to produce positive emotion because the smell is an indicator that you're getting closer to something that you want, which is dinner. And eating dinner will make you satisfied, but detecting the possibility of dinner will make you happy. And those are different things. Now, one of the corollaries of that is that if you don't have a goal, it's very difficult to experience any positive emotion. So no goal, no value structure, no positive emotion, because your brain can't calculate when you're on the path to somewhere better. And so part of the reason the future authoring program works is because it helps people develop a comprehensive vision of what their life would be like if their life was put together well. And then by making that into a detailed plan, they link the things they do from day to day, which can be kind of trivial and mundane in and of themselves. They link those directly to higher order, long-term valued goals. And that tags them with positive motivation. And, you kind of understand that because everybody knows that they're a lot more motivated when they know why they're doing something. And when you know why, what that means is that you understand what you're doing in relationship to a valued goal. So part of it is that we're setting people up so they can experience positive emotion. And then the other part is that if you don't have a value hierarchy, then you're anxious because you're being pulled in 10 directions all the time, or you're drowning in chaos because you don't know what to do. And so if you construct a careful representation of the future that you desire, then that puts walls around you, but also allows you a clear path forward. And so you get less anxious and less chaotic and less nihilistic, all of which are very good things, so less depressed as well and less hopeless. At the same time, you become more motivated in a positive direction. And that's enough to produce these huge changes in performance. One of the things we saw in Holland was that, because we were trying to figure out, well, what did the students do differently after they completed the future authoring program? Why did their grades go up so much? And part of what happens is that more students go and write their finals. Because one of the reasons that people fail out of university, a primary reason, is that they end up getting zeros on some of their assignments, or they don't go to their exams and they get zeros. And then that's the end of them. So, I think it was Woody Allen who said that 99% of life is just showing up. And it seems that one of the consequences of doing this program is that you're just that much more likely to put in the additional effort necessary to do the workaday things that you have to do to thrive and to accomplish your goals. It makes you tougher as well because, everybody is beset by doubts whenever they're pursuing anything. And the doubts are enervating and draining. And one of the things we ask people to do in the future authoring program is to come up with a very articulated rationale, a deeply articulated rationale for why the things they're doing are important, and then not just to them, but to their family and to the broader community. And so if you're going to move forward in life, like moving forward is difficult, it's effortful. And so you need a compelling reason. And the more your arguments are lined up behind you, the more doubts and obstacles you can overcome.
All right, before I throw the wrap-up question at you, I want to just selfishly ask you an unrelated question, but that I'm just curious about what somebody who's a professional in psychology would say.
Sure.
And I hope this doesn't sound too primitive, but I wonder what somebody like you thinks about the so-called four temperaments, melancholic, sanguine, phlegmatic, and choleric, because they seem to have tremendous explanatory power, and a mixture of them, which most people are a mixture, does seem to account for practically everybody I know. Is there anything that anybody ever uses that for?
Well, I would say the newer models, the newest personality model is the Big Five model, and it was derived statistically from very, very large bodies of descriptive adjectives and phrases. And it seems to apply cross-culturally, and it actually, I would say, it's a reasonable analog to that classic temperamental theory. Extroversion is a positive emotion dimension, so extroverts are very enthusiastic and assertive. They're always smiling. They dominate social situations. They're very talkative. They like to be salespeople. And neuroticism is the second dimension. And people who are high in neuroticism feel a lot of anxiety and emotional pain. And so they're more prone to depression and anxiety disorders. And they're more concerned with security and more worried about things. Agreeable people, that's the third dimension. Agreeable people, that's a maternal dimension. And agreeable people are compassionate and polite, and disagreeable people are competitive and combative. And women are more agreeable than men by quite a substantial margin, and women also experience more negative emotion than men. And that seems to be primarily biological, both of those. And the fourth dimension is conscientiousness, and conscientious people are orderly and industrious. Conservatives are more conscientious than liberals. It's one of their defining characteristics, especially more orderly. And the fifth dimension is openness, and openness is a creativity dimension. People who are open are interested in aesthetics and fiction and literature and art, and also interested in ideas. They're creative. And liberals are higher in openness than conservatives. And a lot of that's biological too. And one of the upshots of this that you might find interesting is that people tend to vote their temperament. And so open, low conscientious people vote for liberal and left parties, and more closed and conscientious people vote for more right-leaning parties. And the way that plays out economically is that the liberal types, so the types that are high in creativity and low in conscientiousness, are the artists and the entrepreneurs. And the conservative types, who are high in conscientiousness and lower in openness, are the managers and administrators. And so in our modern society, conservatives need liberals to start companies and to come up with new ideas, and liberals need conservatives because the conservatives run companies and implement things. And it's important that people understand that, because there's such a political divide now between the two sides that people forget that an economy is actually a functioning interdependency of different temperamental types.
Well, I appreciate that answer. That really was very helpful. I'm glad for it. All right, I'm going to let you go, but before we do, let's get back to self-authoring.
Yeah.
The biggest objection I bet you'll get is, this sounds great, but I have a busy schedule. I can't fit it in. I can already sort of anticipate, based on what you've said in its favor, how you'd answer that. But what's your pithy response to I don't have time?
Oh, well, I have a couple of responses to that. The first is that this is more practical and philosophical, which is that it's really useful to make time to think about the medium to long term. And one of the problems that managers often face in their day-to-day activities is that they're so busy fighting fires that they don't have time to think about what they're doing in the medium to long term. So it's useful to strategize about how to make some time, generally speaking, to think about the medium to long term. The second thing would be, don't kid yourself. This program will save you time. Like, it won't save you time today because maybe you'll do it today, but over any reasonable span of time, like 3 months, you'll be way ahead in terms of time saving if you do it. And then the final thing, most practically, is that do a little bit of it every day or once a week. Like, you don't have to, do not sit and wait for a big chunk of time where you can just concentrate on this, because people don't get big chunks of time. And it actually works better if you just hack away at it. And like, so I would say, if you don't have time, then do it for shorter periods of time and do it badly, because it'll still pay off in a big way.
All right, that's a great pitch. That's a great pitch. Well, selfauthoring.com is what people should check out. Of course, linking to that at tomwoods.com/800. Isn't it great and cathartic to be able to talk about your actual work for a change?
It is. It is really a relief. Because it's really a relief. And you know, it's related in some way, because you know, part of the reason I've been concerned about political correctness is because I think it's an abdication of personal responsibility, as well as something that's fundamentally totalitarian. And I think the right medication for that isn't necessarily counter political moves, although that may be necessary. I think the right medication is for individuals to develop their own character and their skills, because that makes them so powerful that it's hard to impede their pathway forward with idiotic political nonsense. And it also makes people much better at defending their own position. And so it fits nicely into that. And that's partly why we gave away so many of the programs. It's like it's an attempt to help people develop their character, to strengthen the political state through the strengthening of individuals, instead of thinking about it only as a sociological or political problem.
Well, thanks again for your time, Professor Peterson. Selfauthoring.com. I hope everybody will check that out. And best of luck. And I'm glad from all appearances, have had really one victory after another. If it came with some struggle, but it looks like you came out on top, and we're all pleased to hear that.
Yes, well, I've been very fortunate, and thank God for that, because it didn't necessarily have to turn out that way.
No, indeed. Well, thanks again for your time. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, that's it for today. I got a little weekend assignment for you. Check out libertyclassroom.com this weekend, because just till December 30th, we are slashing the price on the Master, which is the lifetime membership to the site. We got 17 courses now, and every single course we ever create, as long as we all live, will be yours with the Master membership, plus the over 400 videos I created for the Ron Paul curriculum, also in audio format to listen on the go, learn the history and economics they didn't teach you, and be taught by me and by other folks you trust over at libertyclassroom.com. 150 smackers off. I almost said dollars. 150 smackers off the Master membership, but that is a very limited time deal. So check that out at libertyclassroom.com, and I'll see you next week for episode 801.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.